Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor at USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set, cocked, locked? Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. Thank you for being in class with us today. Jason, thank you for engineering. Thank you for contacting Guineith Isaacs live in Australia. Guineith, welcome.
Hello, Vincent. How are you this morning?
Well, you know, I'm thinking about last Wednesday when you were on the air with us. And you were teaching the class, and you said, get ready, because here it comes. And here it is.
Yeah.
We have this real well, you said it was going to happen. And
I'm gobsmacked.
And you said it would be. Well, so we have this crisis, and I had the statistics in front of me, but there are several states that are in that have declared emergencies. And there have been fights at gas pumps. Gas has topped $3 a gallon. And, you know, about a year ago, I think we were looking at, maybe a little longer than a year ago, about $1.65, $1.70. And now it's, you know, almost doubled here in the United States. I'm talking about the national average. I'm talking about the low of about a year and a half, 2 years ago. I'm going by memory to today. The price has just about doubled. And I remember 1973, 1974, the Arab oil embargo. And those were the days when the Arabs pulled back 5% of the fuel that was coming to this country. 5%. And so that was what was withdrawn from the market. And the result was that if you had a government job, you could get fuel. If you were a medical doctor, you could get fuel. But everybody else, you had to wait in line. And the lines were based on the digit of your license plate, whether it was odd or even. And if it ended in an even number, you could get gasoline on an even day. If it ended in an odd number, you could get gasoline on an odd day. But odd people couldn't get even gasoline. You know, even day gasoline. And we were limited to the purchases. And I'm thinking they're about $3. So people would line up at 4 o'clock in the morning to get in line for a gas station that would open at, let's say, 9 o'clock in the morning to get their $3 worth. And some gas stations were doing things like, well, you know, we can only give you $3 worth of gasoline. But, you know, if you need that tune-up that you've been waiting for, well, if you get that tune-up, we can do that for you. And, you know, just to make sure that the car is running properly, we'll fill it up with gasoline for you. So, you know, it wasn't like asking for a donation. They were telling you that if you gave them the opportunity to tune up your vehicle, points, condenser, rotor, spark plugs, you know, spark plug wires, that kind of thing, new air filter, maybe an oil change, oil filter, oil, then you could get a full tank of fuel. You know, while they put your car up on the lift, and after they shut the gas lines down, after an hour, then they could fill up your vehicle. And that's what they would do. They'd run the gas lines for about an hour, and then they'd shut them off. So people would wait hours and hours and hours, and some people would get in line late, and they would say, sorry, we're not doing any more pumping of gas today. So already in the United States, there was one company called Parker in the southeast, and they are already rationing. So gasoline, national average is $3 per gallon. It hit that, I guess this morning or late yesterday, $3.008 per gallon national average. And, this Parker company that has a chain of, gas stations is, limiting gasoline to $50. Why? Because there's some pigs that have shown up with huge gasoline tanks. I'm talking, looks like, I don't know, about 1,000 gallons or 500 gallons. And they show up to the regular retail gas pump and they just turn that nozzle on and it takes like an hour or 2 or 3 to fill it up. And it's really inconsiderate. It's awful. But I understand why they're probably doing it, because they have some gas powered equipment and they want to keep working. Maybe they're in the lawn care business. I don't know what they're doing, but, that's the kind of stuff that's going on in the United States. Fights, rationing, and, a lot of stations, about 2,000 of them now are dry, empty. You can't get the cheap stuff. You can't get the middle grade, and they're out of premium. And, diesel seems to be the one thing that you can get some of. Guineith, back to you.
Yeah, I think, or I wrote in an email to you earlier of where this is going, and because I'm a farmer, I think specifically with regards to the farming sector. This is going to end up with farmers doing their work with shovels, spades, rakes, and wheelbarrows, unfortunately, and horse-drawn and oxen-drawn vehicles. This is where it's going to end up. Now, not many farmers will be able to make that adjustment. Very, very few farmers will be able to make that adjustment. I can, because I never really had mechanized tools here in the first place. But, most farmers are going to be in for a world of hurt, because how do you transport a round bale with a wheelbarrow? Well, you don't, unless you can do it one wheelbarrow at a time. Which is, I get round bales for my horses and I transport them down to the horse paddock one wheelbarrow at a time. So they get 3 wheelbarrows of hay a day. But when you've got 20, 30, 40, 100 cows, you can't do that. And, this is it. Or sheep or goats or whatever your livestock is. I only have a few horses, and so I can do it. But like I say, this is something where all farmers are going to be in for a world of hurt unless they can find other ways to do what they need to do. And as regarding the city people, farmers will find a way. They will get by somehow. But city people, they've got no alternatives. Apartment dwellers have no alternatives. I'm guessing that, I'm not guessing, I'm analysing that within about a week or two, most of the workplaces will be shut down. That means people won't be getting paychecks, and that means that businesses, many of them, will go under, because they may only just be recovering from lockdown situations. And this is going to be the final straw for a lot of them, and a lot of them will shut down for good. And now we all need to remember who's responsible here. It's not a group of Russian hackers. It's not a group of Ukrainians. It's not the Muslims or the Arabs. It's not any of these groups. It's not, some snot-nosed teenager gang in their mum's basements. It's not BLM, and it's not Antifa. It's Bill Gates. It's George Soros. You know who we're all talking about. And it's Satan Klaus Schwab. This is who it is. They said that they were going to do it 2 weeks ago, and then they do it. And it's like this. I'm not saying that anybody should do this. This is a hypothetical scenario. If somebody says, we're going to show up at so-and-so's place with a can of gasoline and a lighter at 1 a.m., and he'd better be ready because there's going to be interesting times at so-and-so's place at 1 a.m. with a lighter and a can of gasoline, then so-and-so had better be ready because that's a threat in this hypothetical situation. Because that criminal who owns the can of gasoline and the lighter has just telegraphed ahead in time what he's going to do. He said that he's going to be around at someone's place at 1 a.m. with a lighter and a can of matches. A can of gasoline. Can of matches. This is what they did. About 10 days or 2 weeks ago, however long ago it was, they said, actually it was Klaus Schwab went on the international media and he said, soon we're going to be doing a cyber terrorism drill. It's going to be called Cyber Polygon, and we're going to be doing a drill on the shutdown of critical infrastructure. And he said it. And CNN broadcast it, the BBC broadcast it, NBC broadcast it, the whole lot broadcast it. They all broadcast it, And then everybody acts surprised when this happens and wants to know who's responsible and who did it. Well, it's the guy who said, hypothetically, in our hypothetical example, that he's going to go around to so-and-so's place with a can of gasoline or lighter at 1 a.m. We're not recommending anyone should do that, by the way. We're using this as an example for what Klaus Schwab did 10 days ago. He said he was going to do it, and then he did it. So who do you think it was? And there's this little bunch of grey-haired gangsters is who it is, They're criminal psychopaths. They're literal live James Bond villains walking around in our universe. And, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I'm the only one who sees this. Actually, I'm not. Alex Jones said it yesterday on his show, on the Alex Jones show. He said, Klaus, Cyber Polygon. He said, I can't believe anybody sees this. He gets into a bit of a temper as well. And so he should. He just picks out things that they say ahead of time and then tells everybody, and everybody acts like he's some, amazing genius for seeing everything that happens before it happens, when they telegraph ahead of time what they're going to do, and then they're going to do it. And then they do it. And everybody's wondering who it was. Does that make sense, Vincent? I think it's amazing, that people can't see this. When they say in public press conferences what they're going to do, and then it happens. Oh, it's just amazing.
I've got a comment about what you were talking about hay, and how do you get that 1,000-pound round bale of hay from one place to another without fuel? I just did a quick thought, and I'll tell you when we come back about the fuel that's used in making that bale of hay and dropping it in the field, just where it's baled. Forget moving it. Just leaving it right there in the field after it's been baled. We'll be right back. So, when we bale hay, we use a round baler. It happens to be a John Deere brand round baler, and it produces roughly 1,000-pound roll of hay. Now, in order to do that, we hook a hay mower up, and a hay mower has a bunch of cutters. Ours has 7 spinning discs that travel about 3 inches off the ground, and they travel at such a high, they spin at such a high rate of RPM that they slice through the grass, and the grass just falls over. It doesn't get chopped and diced. It just stays complete, and it gets it gets cut and it falls over. And so in order to operate that hay mower, it takes about an 85 horsepower or more tractor. And when you think about 85 horsepower, if you relate that to cars, that's nothing. I mean, the smallest car's got more than 85 horsepower. But I assure you that if you took, 5 Toyota Camrys and you chained them together and you had a tug of war with our John Deere tractor, which is about 100 horsepower, and the tug of war was with 5 Toyota Camrys all pulling in a line, chained one to the next, to the next, to the next. And then the other end of the chain was against our John Deere tractor. We dragged those 5 Toyota Camrys all over. I mean, they would lose. Their wheels would be spinning. There'd be smoke coming from the tires, but the John Deere tractor would just pull them backwards. So a 100 horsepower tractor is a big deal. It's a pretty big tractor. And so in order to run this hay mower, that's what we have. And then, so once the hay is mowed, the next thing we do is we ted it. We have this thing, it's like an egg beater. It's about 13 feet wide, and we hook that up to a 40 horsepower tractor. And the tines on this egg beater will grab the grass and flip it up in the air, and it comes down in a random pattern. Because when the hay is just cut with the hay mower, it looks like it's been combed. It's all the hay, or all the grass is in a line. Well, the tedder flips it up in the air and it comes down a random pattern. There's more air that can circulate under it, and it can dry more quickly. It can dry in about a day and a half. Then the next thing we do is after it's dried, we hook up our tractor, about a 40 horsepower tractor, to a hay rake. And that's about 13 feet wide or wider. And it may be a little wider than that. And it rakes the hay into what's called a windrow. And that's a row of hay. It's just almost a continuous row of hay all around the field. And then the next thing we do is we hook up a baler, the round baler. And that takes about 100 horsepower to run that thing. And that will pick up the hay from the windrow, and it will roll it and roll it and roll it and roll it into a round bale. And then we have string that ties it. Twine. And the twine comes in 20,000-foot rolls. So that's the process. Now, when we're done, the hay is just lying in rolls in the field. And I wanted to let you know that process takes about 1/2 gallon of diesel fuel per roll. So if you add up the cutting it, plus the tedding it, plus the raking it, plus the baling it, that all adds up. We use about 100 gallons per season, or per cutting, for about 200 bales of hay. So that tells me it's about 1/2 gallon of diesel fuel per bale. Now, if we can't get the diesel fuel, there won't be any hay, and the cows are going to starve in the wintertime. And there'll be a great price cut on beef. You'll be able to get beef for very, very low cost if farmers can't get diesel fuel. And then there will be so many cows slaughtered because the farmers can't feed them that the price of beef will skyrocket the next year. Beef will be scarce. That's the way it's going to go if farmers can't get fuel. And I delineated on earlier this week about how fractional distillation works and how this is going to be a big problem for all manufacturing. I'm not talking about just distribution. I'm talking about all manufacturing with the raw materials that they need, like plastic. That comes from crude oil. And there will be scarcities. And there are lots of rumbling right now about scarcities. So if this pipeline doesn't get fixed, the refineries are going to be shut down, or some of them in Texas. And that will cause shortages in raw materials for manufacturing, let alone distribution. Guineith Isaacs is with us, and we've been talking about this fuel crisis from the Colonial Pipeline hacking. And Guineith warned us about this last week. Let me just put this in perspective. It's currently reported that 71% of gas stations in Charlotte, Metro Charlotte, are without gasoline. 71%. In Wilmington, North Carolina, 61% without gasoline. This is from Zero Hedge. In Myrtle Beach, 37% without gasoline. Norfolk, Virginia, that'd be 60%. And in Atlanta, Metro Atlanta, 60% are without gasoline. So right now, there are about 1,800 gas stations currently out of gasoline in the states of Alabama, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, Maryland, and Virginia. As of midnight, Gas Buddy shows the percentage of filling stations in each state without gasoline. This is the percentage of gas stations without gasoline according to Gas Buddy. Georgia, 15%. Alabama, 2%. Tennessee, 3%. South Carolina, 13%. North Carolina, 25%. Florida, 4%. Virginia, 15%. Maryland, 4%. Now, I rounded those numbers, okay? I rounded down and I rounded up according to the way I was taught rounding is done in elementary school. So that's the current situation right now. And I believe I heard on the news just a few minutes ago that they're expecting to start the pipeline up by the end of the week. Now, the pipeline is a total of 5,500 miles. That's a lot of pipe. Now, how long do you think it's going to take to fill up that pipeline? So if you have a garden hose and you're going to water the garden, you unroll that hose and you hook it up to your faucet and you turn it on. Water doesn't come out instantaneously the second you open that faucet. So water doesn't come out that end of that 100-foot hose instantaneously. It takes a little bit of time, and it's in seconds, but it takes a little bit of time. So what about 5,500 miles? Let's say the fuel, and I'm just guessing, let's say it can move at 10 miles an hour. How long will it take to fill up a pipeline or pipeline network of 5,500 miles at 10 miles an hour? Let's say it goes 20 miles an hour. Now think about that. That's blazing fast to run fuel through a pipeline. 20 miles an hour. So you have to assume that it's going to take a while, even though the experts and the officials and those who are telling us what the status is they say that, we're hoping to have this up by the end of the week. Okay, fine. Up by the end of the week doesn't mean the gas station that is out of gas is going to have fuel by the end of the week. It means that they're going to start the pipeline. Maybe by the end of the week. And then they have to fill the pipeline. And then once the pipeline gets filled, it has to go to the terminals. And the terminals will start filling their tanks, which are depleted in many locations. And then once their tanks are filled, then they can start filling up the tanker trucks to deliver the fuel to the gas stations. And then they can start pumping it. And then the next thing that's going to happen is the tanks that have run empty at these gas stations, there's mud in the bottom of these tanks, sediment, algae, black goo, literally. How do I know this? Because I used to pump gas and put a stick in the tank to measure how much gas is in the tank. I know what's in the bottom of these tanks. It will clog your fuel system. So here's what happens. The tank is empty at the service station. They fill it up and they stir up all that mud in the bottom of the tank. Some of it goes and gets trapped by the fuel filter at the pump. Some of it gets past the fuel filter, and you get to collect that in your tank. I just wanted to share all this with you. So it's a way bigger deal than is being purported. Just some gas stations out of gas. It's a big deal. And I don't think it's being reported this way by other broadcasts. I don't think so. I don't think they know. You have to have worked at a gas station, have experience measuring the depth of gasoline in the tanks. You have to know what that's like. And you pull that long stick out and you look and say, oh gosh, the bottom of that's pretty gooey. Where'd that come from? And gas stations hire companies to pump out that goo on a routine basis from the bottom of those tanks. You just don't see it. But they do. And that's when guys like me would go to the boss and say, look how much goo. There's 3 inches of goo in the bottom of this stick. Oh, I guess we better call a guy. Get it pumped out. And when they pump it out, it stinks. It smells like an open septic system. No kidding. Guineith, back to you.
Okay, there's something that absolutely nobody's considering here, and I'm not a career criminal in this life, but for whatever reason, I have the capacity to think like one. Okay, and one thing that they said in that news broadcast was, we should have the pumps working by the end of the week. What they were really saying is, we are going to pay the ransom. Hold on there. We're just waiting for the checks to clear. You'll get your money. Just hang in there. That's what they were really saying. But they couldn't tell the general public that. And I can tell you something for sure. I know the business model of extortion and blackmail. Okay, I know what their business model is. And I've known what their business model is my entire life. When I was 15, I had friends, supposed to be, they were enemies actually, try and pull some stunts on me, and I didn't fall for it, and it didn't work. Okay? And paying blackmailers does not make them go away. Paying blackmailers and extortionists and kidnappers only encourages them. If anyone thinks that them paying Colonial Pipeline, paying off these hackers, supposed to be, aka, the list of suspects that I named at the beginning of the broadcast, who telegraphed their intention ahead of time, and then look, what do you know, it happened. They're not going to go away. You have not heard the end of this. If anybody thinks, oh yeah, well, they'll pay the ransom and, they'll get their business back and it'll all just go away, we'll all go back to normal and be happy ever after. That's not how it works. Okay? Paying extortionists and blackmailers and kidnappers and hostage takers, and we've all been taken hostage by these people, only encourages them. They're going to do it again and again and again and again and again. That's the business model. That's how it works. Okay? They, back in the day, the U.S. military had a policy, and my son had a movie. He said, oh, you got to watch this movie, Mum. It's called Black Hawk Down. And, they had this American soldier who was taken hostage by some group of Somalis back in a war, back in the day sometime. I can't really remember which one. That he was taken hostage by these Somalis, and they were saying, oh, the U.S. government will pay handsomely for you. And this U.S. soldier said, no, they won't. They don't pay ransoms, ever. They just don't. And back in the day, that was the policy of the U.S. military. I don't know what ended up happening to that soldier, but that telegraphed back in the day, back when it's quite a famous movie. We've got it on DVD here, we've got a DVD player, we watch movies sometimes. But that was quite an educational movie of what the U.S. military used to do about kidnappers and hostage takers. They did not used to pay the ransoms. We're all being held to ransom by these guys. And Colonial, using coded language that they used, just telegraphed that they were going to pay the ransom. This is not going to go away, Vincent. Does that make sense to you? This is going to happen over and over again. And we better get used to farming without using fossil fuels somehow. People did it 200 years ago. But 200 years ago, 90% of the population was engaged in farming. And that 90% of the population that was engaged in farming were not all farmers. Maybe 1% of that 90% were farm owners. The rest were labourers, okay? And those labourers were not unskilled labourers. You sometimes hear them described in the history books as unskilled labour. They were not unskilled labour. It was a highly skilled job. It is a highly skilled job to make hay without mechanical machinery. 200 years ago, they were doing it, but it would take a whole army of villagers to get the hay crop for the village in for the year. It would take maybe, 20, 30, 40, 50 people from the local village going down to the hay field, cutting the hay by hand. What was the word you used? Tossing. You toss it up into the air to make a random pattern. They'd get a hay fork and they'd do it all by hand. And you'd have 50 villagers in the paddock tossing hay by hand. They're usually the woman. And, the men would be cutting it and, and raking it and all of this sort of stuff. And there was an art. The most skilled of the haymakers was the stack builders. And they would build a haystack on the back of a huge horse-drawn or oxen-drawn trailer with great wooden wheels. And the wheels were made by a wheelwright. And the harness for the horses or the oxen was made by a harness maker. And the feet for the horses or the oxen were taken care of by a blacksmith or a farrier. There was a job. There still is a job. Sometimes I have to or I either have to do it by hand myself, trim the horse's hooves. And if you've got cows, their hooves need to be trimmed sometimes too, and that will be one of your jobs. But it's a highly skilled job. And that's an example of where we are going back to and what a world of hurt we are in because people don't know how to do this anymore. I can hear music and I suspect we're probably heading into a break.
Yep, we're going into a break in just a couple seconds. Guineith and I will be right back. So it's been reported that the Washington, D.C. Police Department, known as the Metropolitan Police Department, has had unauthorized access on their server. It's been reported that about 250 gigabytes of data has been captured by those who are demanding payment, or that information or data will be made public. Well, the ransom amount is in the millions of dollars, and it's been reported that the Metropolitan Police Department, Washington, D.C.'s police department, has offered $100,000 to pay for the key to the ransom. And that has been declined by the hackers. They say it's not enough. So here's what they're threatening. They're threatening to release this information, which includes disciplinary records of police officers and employees, personal information like where they live, phone numbers, addresses, etc. So if this doesn't come to resolution through negotiation, I guess, these facts of who the police department has disciplined, where they live, etc., will be released. And if you think about it, that's kind of like turnabout. When someone gets arrested, that information becomes public, doesn't it? But the information about when a police officer is disciplined by internal affairs, that's kept private, isn't it? So it looks like the police department of Washington, D.C. is really concerned about the release of this information, especially in the current climate of people not trusting the police anymore at the current today's environment. So this is pretty serious. Not a good time to be a policeman. I am not defending the hack. But, this is the kind of thing that happens when people get really frosted and frustrated. But the hackers say that they're not trying to cause problems. They just want to make money. They want to they want to extort money from organizations. Now, according to what I've read, that there are 26 agencies that are believed to have been hit by ransomware this year. And it's believed that 16 of them have seen their data released online, according to a company called EMSISoft, EMSISoft. And the average ransom demand is grown to a little over $100,000. So companies who are putting their data in the cloud, companies who are putting their data online, companies who have access through the internet are all at risk, all at risk. I don't do that. I don't do that. We used to have Rolodex cards for names and numbers and things like that, contacts. That's really hard to hack. You actually have to break and enter to steal a Rolodex, compared to remote hacking from some apartment somewhere, anywhere in the world, through the use of the internet. So this system that Americans have adopted because they're lazy, they don't want to write checks, the banks have convinced their customers to use online banking, that has put all of those customers and the businesses and the banks at risk. I think it's crazy. We still pay our bills the old-fashioned way. We write checks. And actually, it costs us more to write checks, because some companies will give us a lower cost if we would just pay them electronically. And what does that do? That eliminates the person who processes the check. That gets rid of more employees. That means computers talking to computers talking to computers. And that's one of the reasons why we can't talk to people today. This morning before the broadcast, I called a company. I'm still trying to buy that one part for the solar system that I've been trying to get for days. I finally called, and I pressed enough buttons that I get transferred to the sales department. Guy called me back, and he said, hey, I'm calling you back. I'm not the guy that you called, but I work for that guy, so I'm calling you back. How can I help you? And I said, here's what I want to buy. And I gave him the part number. He had no idea what it was. He lives in Manhattan, New York City. He has no idea what these solar system parts are. No clue. No clue. That's what we're dealing with today. He's on the 47th floor of a skyscraper in New York City, and he's going to help me with parts for a solar system. I don't think he's ever seen a solar system. Not even in a screen on the internet. That's how far we're falling, class. It's terrible. It's terrible. Just try to buy parts. And now our payments are going to be late because the post office is thinking, a couple of weeks to get first-class mail across the street. That's acceptable. We'll be right back. Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. When I say cocked and locked, I mean ready for any and everything. Are you prepared? The Boy Scouts might have used cocked and locked as their motto. Be prepared. That it was the Boy Scouts motto, as I remember it as a child. Guineith, the times are precarious. Everything's going wrong. The politicians are fighting with each other. The police has become at odds with the people, and vice versa. There's no trust in anything. Warranties don't mean anything. Campaign pledges and promises don't mean anything. It's every man, woman, and child for him or herself. That's what it appears to me to be. Any comments?
The rats are fighting each other as they are looking to leap over the bulwarks to leave the sinking ship. This is what is happening in Washington at the moment with this whole Liz Cheney thing being a prime example. The Democrat Party's no better. You are seeing the collapse of the American empire. Actually, somebody whose work I follow quite closely is Jeff Berwick, and he has a website called Dollar Vigilante. I think it's called $dollarvigilante.com or dollarvigilante.com. And he wrote a book which was actually published earlier this year, and his book is entitled The Controlled Demolition of the American Empire. Okay. I haven't read the book, but I would like to read the book, and I would like to get it in hard copy if I possibly can before, things collapse completely. But there are other things that are higher up on my shopping list than that, like I would say a nice big kettle and an oil press would be at the top of my list. By a nice big kettle, I mean about a 96-litre stainless steel kettle to sit on the top of my fire, because I need that sort of kettle sometimes. And that sort of kettle currently sells on eBay for about $130 to $150. It seems like it might be about a month before I'm able to do that. But if the world is still around in about a month, I would be kind of a little bit surprised. So I don't know. Oh my gosh, it really is all going to pot. It really is. There's no way around it. We are facing the apocalypse, and if we end up on the technological level of the Amish at the end of this, we'll actually be doing quite well. I've been saying that on and off for a few years. That's really, really what I believe. I believe that, most of the population is going to be in a world of hurt, and they're probably going to end up dead just from starvation on account of the fact that they don't know how to do anything. And farmers are going to be in a world of hurt because practically everything they do relies on fossil fuels. And nobody knows how to dig a fence post hole with a spade anymore. Nobody knows how to do that. Nobody knows how to plant a tree on the farm so that in a dry climate, so that it's going to survive the summer without any mechanized tools. If they want to dig, a 1 meter, or half meter square hole, they'll get a little ditch digger to dig that, half meter square hole. And if I need to dig a half meter square hole, I don't have access to a ditch digger. I've got a spade. And so I'll get out there with my spade and I will dig the hole by hand with my spade. And I will cart wood chips or rubbish to put down the bottom of the hole to be a place for the worms to live. And I will fill that hole with well-aged manure, and I will mix polyacrylate into the well-aged manure, and I'll fill the hole with water, and I will thoroughly soak that well-aged manure, and then I'll put a layer of aged hay across the top of it, old hay across the top of it for a layer of mulch, and then I'll leave it for 6 to 8 weeks. And I'll guarantee, I've told people how to do this on air now so that people know how to do it. And after about a month, maybe 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks, just depends on the time of the year, you've got a beautiful tree planting place. You can plant a tree there. And it's a day's work to do that for one woman. I don't know if men could do it quicker, but for me, it takes at least a day or a day and a half to do this. But at the end of it, I've got a tree planting hole that is just about guaranteed to grow a fruit tree, a nut tree, or an olive oil tree. You know, this is it. But nobody, you can't do this on a massive scale, and nobody knows how to do this anymore. You know, it took years for me to figure out how to do this, you know. That's just one example. And I've decided here on my farm to concentrate on things that I can do with my own hands. And I've only got 20 acres, and there's really only me and my son here, you know. So we chop wood by hand. We have pumps to pump water, you know, but if the pump fails, then we fill up the gravity tank by hand, with one standing at the top of the tower and the other one down at the bottom of the tower with a hose, filling up the bucket. And then, you know, when the bucket's full, then the one that's at the top of the tower lifts it up and then puts it into the gravity tower. If the pump fails, that's what we have to do. Otherwise, we fill up bottles once a day from the tank, and then we take them inside. Big bottles, you know, probably about a gallon each. And there might be 4 or 5 of them, and that's our water for the day. That's if the pump fails. You know, this is it. People used to do this every day. 150 or 200 years ago, most people didn't have water pipes in their house. Most people had big bottles of water that they would go and take to their local well, the village well, or their own farm well, and they would have a bucket, and they would have a little crane or a gantry on top of the well, and then they would turn the handle on the well, and then they'd put the bucket down the bottom and fill up, and then carry it up, and that's how they would do their water. You know, if they had animals, the animals drank from a dam or a creek, or they would fill up a trough by hand each day using water from the well. They didn't have. And if you had a pump, it was one of the big hand pumps, or it was a hydraulic ram in a creek, which is a type of water pump that uses water pressure, the water pressure in the creek to pump the water. It's a very clever device. I'm not going to describe right now what it is, but if you want to see one, then just type in hydraulic ram on your favorite search engine, and you'll come up for the plans for one. They're very easy to build. They work, there's hydraulic rams out there that are hundreds of years old. But this is
it's a mechanical process, class.
Back to doing. What was that, sorry?
It's a mechanical process. The hydraulic ram is a mechanical process, and it's spelled hydraulic, and then the next word is ram, R-A-M. Gwyneth, one of the things that we're going to talk about today, or I was hoping we could talk about, are things that the Queen owns. But I wanted to just go off on a quick tangent. We were talking about, manual horsepower. 1 horsepower is 746 watts. Okay, class? And I want you to think about this. So one day at the expo, unknown to me, a guy showed up. This was our expo. And he had like a bicycle hooked up to a generator. And the bicycle was on a stand, and he was telling people that they could generate their own electricity. All they do is sit on this bicycle seat and pump away, and turn that crank with their feet, and they could generate electricity. Now the answer is yes, they can. But how much electricity? And that's where people were kind of led to believe that they could generate way more electricity than they possibly could. So if you're thinking you can run your refrigerator by sitting on a bicycle hooked up to a small generator, the answer is no. You can't. Because I believe that the average person in reasonably good shape could generate about 1/10 of a horsepower. So that's 75 watts, roughly. Now, 75 watts won't light up a 100-watt light bulb. It won't start a refrigerator. It won't run the electric mixer. It won't run your kitchen lighting. It'll hardly do anything. And you got to sit there cranking away on this generator / bicycle to do it. So if you think that we can do without electricity, the answer is we're going to be hard pressed to do it. And we'll go back to exactly what Guineith has been talking about, the hard way. And Guineith was talking about digging roughly a 3-foot square hole in the ground. And it's hard work. I'm telling you, it's hard work. It's heavy and it's hard. And the average guy probably doesn't even have the shovel to do it if he wanted to do it. And you're not going to be able to do it in flip-flops. You're not going to be able to do it in bare feet. You're going to have boots on to push down with your foot on that shovel. And you're going to have a back that's strong enough to take that load of dirt out of the hole. And the deeper the hole gets, the harder it is to do. But that 3-foot by 3-foot or 1 meter by 1 meter square hole is about the size that you need to plant a tree. Because the tree, if you do it, a lot of people do, they just dig a hole about a foot in diameter and they plant a tree and the tree doesn't grow worth a darn because the tree's roots can't penetrate that compacted soil outside of that 1 foot diameter hole. So it needs to be a big hole, exactly as Gwen said, and it needs to be of soft compost that's mature with fertility in it in order for that tree to survive the transplanting. That's what it takes. And it's going to be a tough row to hoe. Guineith, we're going to talk about the Queen and some of the things that she owns, right? This is staggering.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about that when we come back. Let's talk about...
I can hear music.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the artworks that she owns. We'll tell you how many she owns. Get ready to be absolutely floored. I did a little bit of arithmetic to figure out, just a way of describing this. You're not going to believe it. We'll be right back. So one of the things that the Queen is in charge of is the Royal Art Collection. And it's one of the world's largest, most impressive art collection. Now, she doesn't personally own it, but it's held in trust by her. And there are 1 million+ pieces in the collection. And about 150,000 artworks from some of the great masters like Rembrandt, Raphael, etc. And some of these are displayed in museums, etc. But so I just did a quick calculation. I said, all right, so of 150,000 pieces, let's say she were going to view, or anyone, we're just going to view one of them per minute. Just look at each one and give it just a minute. That would be 2,500 hours. Or in work weeks, if you never took lunch and you didn't take a break to use the restroom, that would take, at 40 hours a week, that would be 62 and a half weeks. That's 1.2 years just to look at each piece of the 150,000 works of art for just 1 minute apiece. Now, that doesn't give you time to walk from the first one to the second one. That would mean that they'd be lined up and there'd be a conveyor belt and you could just sit there and you watch them as they go by and, just pause them for 1 minute each. That's an enormous art collection, Guineith.
Yeah, it is.
Any comments?
You know something? The Queen owns a lot of things, okay? She owns every dolphin, every whale, every swan in Britain, in England. I'm not sure about Scotland, but it's probably in Scotland too. The thing is, they're not stupid, okay? People think that the royal family got to where they are. A lot of what it was pure criminality in centuries past, okay? But they're not stupid. And one thing that I would like to point out is what Prince Charles owns is he owns perhaps one of Britain's most important livestock farms, where he maintains bloodlines of almost extinct heritage livestock breeds. Breeds of livestock that can live without large quantities of wormers, without large quantities of extra vitamins, that can live out in the field. He owns, for example, he owns a lot of different livestock bloodlines. But one of the most important ones, in my opinion, is his herd of Berkshire pigs, which are a large black pig, which is specially adapted to live in the British forests, wild, more or less. You know, they become very domestic if you raise them right. You know, if you feed them and all the rest of it and give them extra grain and all that. But they are designed to live as a free-range herd in an oak forest and to graze off the nuts that fall from the oak tree, the acorns and the other nuts that fall from the other wild nut trees that used to form the forests of Britain. The forests of Britain were at one time formed by wild nut trees, especially oak trees, but also hazelnuts and chestnuts and all sorts of other nut trees. This is what formed the deciduous forests of Britain and Europe. And they were inhabited by deer and they were inhabited by pigs. And Prince Charles has the most important herd of Berkshire pigs in Britain. These people are not stupid. They're not going to starve because if the worst comes to the worst, they will take their security detail and they'll go to Prince Charles's farm and they'll live on Prince Charles's farm and they'll be eating pork and vegetables, roast vegetables every night. They're not stupid. I think that we need to take a leaf out of their book, Vincent, in that manner, in that respect. Yeah. Does that make sense? Right,
and I'd like to talk a little bit about the artwork. And if she didn't preserve it, who would? So when we talk about some of these treasures, if the Queen or Prince Charles or someone who has been in a dynasty for a long time doesn't protect and conserve them, who would? Let me give you an example. I know of a very specific artifact. I've touched it. I've held it. And it is the last known best example of, we'll call it the uniform, that was used in a concentration camp. The best known surviving example. This is one that is in darn close to pristine condition. This is the one that was used and hung on the wall at a concentration camp in Europe, controlled by the Nazis. And this particular uniform was to be worn by the Jews that were captive. And this is the last known surviving pristine example. And it was one of the few that were used when the inspections occurred. Like, we're going to make sure that these conditions are humane and new uniforms would be issued rather than the ones that were worn and filthy, etc. So this is the last surviving one. Now, I held it. I happen to know where it is. And if someone who didn't care about it, if someone didn't care about it, it'd be lost. Okay? Now, what happened to this thing? Well, I know for a fact that it hung in the Smithsonian Museum. I know it was there. But eventually, after a couple years, it ended up lost in the basement of the Smithsonian. Why? Because someone probably said, well, let's take that rag down. We don't need to show that thing. It's hideous. It's awful. It represents evil. So let's take it off the wall. Now, the guy who owned it didn't know that it was taken down. He lent it to the Smithsonian to be put on display as a reminder of what happened. So unknown to him, his possession was taken and put in the basement. And eventually it could be lost and no one would remember or even know what happened to it. Now, fortunately, it was discovered that it was no longer on the wall, and he said, I want it back. So when we talk about the preservation of these art pieces of irreplaceable masterpieces of art, I think it's great that they're under the conservatorship of the Queen, because who else is better to do it? Who else has had a family that's been in unbroken chain of command in Europe longer than the House of Windsor? Gwyneth, your comments.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And there are examples of royal houses in Europe that were literally lined up against the wall and shot. I'm speaking about the Romanovs. And some of the, when the Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II, and his family were murdered, their houses were looted, and some of those treasures were lost forever. We don't know where some of the things are that were in some of the Russian palaces. Some of them survived up until World War II, but then the Nazis came along and took them, and because the Bolsheviks didn't really have any, incentive to really want to protect these works of art, exquisite works of art, they've vanished, and nobody knows where they are. I'm thinking specifically of the Amber Room, which was a room in the favorite palace of Catherine the Great, which was called the Hermitage. Now, the Hermitage has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of interconnected rooms, and these days it's a museum. But, this is the Amber Room was maintained by the Bolsheviks because it was absolutely exquisite. All the furnishings of the room, the entire lining of this room, and it was a big room, was all made of amber, which is a precious stone, which is fossilized tree sap. And I've heard stories of what happened to the Amber Room. One of the stories is that it was, the Nazis saw it and they said, wow, look at this. And they immediately dismantled it and put it into a submarine which was sunk. That's one version of the story that I've heard. I don't know what happened to it. Nobody knows what happened to it. But that's an example of an absolutely exquisite work of art that will never, ever be replaced, that was lost because 20 years beforehand, or 30 years, or however long it was, I think it was about 30 years before, the king of Russia was killed, murdered by the Bolsheviks. Now, I don't want anything I want the British royal family to continue because they have the job of protecting Britain and upholding the common law. That's their only job under British common law, is defence of the realm. And that includes the art, it includes the livestock, the native British livestock. Okay, like Berkshire pigs, like Highland cattle, like I know that Black Angus cattle are in no danger of extinction, but there are ancient lines of Black Angus cattle in the Scottish Highlands that are the original Black Angus cattle. And their genetics are not exactly the same as the genetics of the cattle that you have standing in your paddock, Vincent. Because there's been selective breeding happen to the Black Angus cattle since they came to America. They're not the same as the Black Angus that are still in the Scottish Highlands to this day, And these Black Angus cattle are owned by the Crown, owned by Her Majesty, and they graze on Balmoral Estate, and they maintain the bloodlines and make sure that they are true to the ancient type and not to the modern commercial type of Black Angus cattle that you have. That's a treasure. That genetic is a treasure. But you're right, it's art, it's culture, it's history, it's defense of the realm, and really, I believe that for all their faults and flaws and crimes, that the British royal family really does care about Britain as a political and cultural institution. I really believe that. And that no Republican or communist or other form of government will really care about Britain as an institution, as a political power, and also the whole English-speaking world, actually, including Australia and including New Zealand and including Canada. They won't care about the English-speaking world in quite the same way that the Queen will, and her family, and her heirs and successors after her. Does that make sense, Vincent? I think that's what you're getting at, isn't it?
That is exactly what I'm getting at. And if you look at the looting of corporations, if you look at just Sears, Roebuck and Company as an example, it's been around over 100 years, but since the 1970s, it's been looted repeatedly by corporate raiders, mismanagement, etc., hired guns, and they're just there, and they serve at the pleasure of the board of directors, and they have destroyed the institution of Sears, Roebuck and Company. They have. It's known as Sears, and it's a laughingstock because it's been mismanaged. Now, the Crown has a code, I believe. Now, of course, I've never met the Queen nor anyone else in the monarchy. However, I do understand that they have a code of conduct that is simply defined, if you distill it down to its root, it is preserve the monarchy at all costs. Whatever it takes to preserve it, that's what they're going to do. Have you heard that as well?
Yeah, because they have a long memory, and they remember what happened to Tsar Nicholas II. And people forget that Tsar Nicholas II was actually the cousin of the King of England of the day. And the two men, I think it was George V. I think he was the first or second cousin of George V. And if you looked at the two men side by side, Tsar Nicholas II and George V, the King of England, it might be, I might have the name wrong, okay? I can't keep track exactly. There were a number of kings around that time. But they are practically identical, and they could have passed for each other. This is it. They even had the same mustache. This is it, and they were first or second cousins.
You're talking about you're talking about the relationship between the King of England, the head of Germany, and the head or Tsar of Russia. They're all related. All three of them were related. Yeah, that's right. And as a matter of fact,
especially the King of England and the Tsar of Russia were practically identical.
Right.
If anyone can confirm that, they can go on the internet and look up their photos. Tsar Nicholas II, and I think it was King George V, but I might be wrong.
I believe you're right. And also, the House of Windsor adopted the name Windsor because they thought it stood for power, steadfastness, etc. It could be looked up to, the name Windsor, the House of Windsor. And that was because the roots of the royal family are not English at all. There's not one drop, if I'm not mistaken, of English blood in the royal family, it's all German blood, maybe some Danish. Isn't that correct?
Well, yes and no. The Queen Mother was Scottish, from an ancient Scottish family. Okay, so this is it. So, but on Prince Philip's side, he is pure. He traces his ancestry back to Vlad Dracul on the eldest male line, who is the Duke of Transylvania, the one who was modelled after Count Dracula, and that is his direct male ancestor along the eldest male line. So he is the heir of Vlad Dracul. Vlad Dracul was not English.
We'll be right back. Guineith, this is the last segment of today's broadcast. Now, it seems like everything's getting worse. People are in positions, they don't know what they're talking about. They have no business representing the companies that they are employed by. The lack of knowledge is like ubiquitous. People just don't know what they're doing, and it's awful. And so I guess the lesson of today is you're on your own, class. There's no one coming to help you. The government is beyond stupid. They've mismanaged the corona panic. They, I better tell Ron Gibson that we probably violated YouTube's policy again. I think I'll tell him that because of what I just said, mismanaging the corona panic. The government alleged representatives are fighting with each other, and this is the kind of thing that happened just before Rome fell. Everyone in power was trying to retain their power and blame others for all of the faults. Isn't that exactly what happened as Rome was collapsing, Guineith?
That's exactly what happened. And I think that what you said at the end of the last segment was very pertinent, that the royal family has a policy of maintain the monarchy at all costs. And we need to have a policy on in our own estates, okay? Whether you've got an apartment or whether you've got 10,000 acres of land, you need to maintain that estate at all costs. That needs to be your first priority, because without it, you have nothing else, okay? Whether you have a postage stamp in the middle of the city, a little terraced house, you need to make the defense and the maintenance of that estate your top priority. Forget everything else, you know. And I should make up a set of rules, but I think that this would be a good first one. Maintain your integrity before God and man, okay? And let it be a true integrity, not just a matter of fake honor. If you can do that, you'll be well on the way. Second, maintain your estate at all costs. Maintain your personal monarchy at all costs. And thirdly, gosh, what would be third? Don't ever pay extortion or blackmail. Don't ever do that. It never ends, okay? Once you pay it once, you're in it. And if it comes to a choice between paying the extortion fee or figuratively falling on your sword, choose to fall on your sword rather than pay the extortion. That used to be the policy of the U.S. military. I don't know if it is anymore, but it's the only way out.
General George
I think
Patton.
those are three good rules to live by.
Yeah, except for one modification I'd suggest, Guineith. And this would come from General George Patton. And I'm paraphrasing. He didn't say it exactly this way, but don't fall on your sword. Make the other guy fall on his sword.
Exactly.
Okay.
I'll tell you what usually happens if you don't pay the extortion. Okay. Usually the extortionist will back off.
I have
Usually that's what happens.
I have firsthand experience in that. I have firsthand experience in that. Let me just share this very quickly. So a guy, highly placed in, Missouri state politics, very highly placed, told me that if I didn't shut down the Get Prepared Expo, if I didn't shut down USA Prepares, .com LC, Limited Corporation, and if I didn't stop broadcasting USA Prepares, he was going to call a press conference of television, radio, and newsprint and other media, about over 80 sources. He was going to call a press conference, and that's what politicians can do. They can get the media to show up. And he was going to expose Vincent Finelli as someone who believed in UFOs and aliens, and wanted to overthrow the U.S. government, violently overthrow the U.S. government. And he said, if you don't, I'm going to do this. And I said, go ahead. Now, do I want to overthrow the U.S. government? Absolutely not. Now, I think we need a government, an honest government. I really believe that. But as far as UFOs and aliens, I said, well, actually, some of that's true. I do think there are unidentified flying objects. And if we think that we're the biggest and best in the universe, we're pretty arrogant. So, and now what happens is, all these years later, over 10 years later, the Pentagon is saying, yeah, these UFOs are real. How about that? So, politicians can threaten you. They can. And people can, try to extort you. And my response is, go ahead. But, the outcome might not be as...
They end up falling on their own sword.
Yeah.
They will be the ones who end up falling on their own sword.
Right.
In instances of extortion.
I'm not advocating violence, class, but, when you're threatened, you're threatened. And you'll have to decide what to do on your own. I'm not going to provide advice. Guineith, thanks so much for being with us today. I'll see you next week.